The chair has opened up the work session on 1840, and so I guess we'll start with the work session on 1840. Ms. Olson.
All right, Michelle, I do have a bill analysis, sort of. It's got an asterisk on it. So I was aware of the amendment, which means that I did not analyze the entire bill. But because the amendment wasn't public, it also means that I wasn't able to offer much by way of analysis on the written bill analysis. But I was able, because there are some things that are in the bill that are also in the amendment. So there are some things that, first of all, I mean, you can skip the summary. I will note some things are in the bill that are in the amendment. So some things in the summary are still applicable, but all of it is not. One of the things that the amendment addresses were the concerns related to inherently hazardous
Substances.
IHS. For a second, I was like, am I missing something in that? They wrote this a lot quickly. And those provisions have been removed from the bill in the amendment.
Correct.
There had also been, I didn't write it down, so one is okay. I know we said to go, but okay, so I can walk you through the amendment and kind of point out where it is the same as proposed in the bill and where there are some changes. So if you have the amendment and the bill open, we can kind of do that.
Okay.
And then Senator Hickman will correct me if I
No, you go right
made
for it.
a mistake. But okay, so the bill and the amendment both proposes the same change in the amendment as in the bill regarding the definition of caregiver retail store. On the bill analysis, I have included for you the current definition, which I mean you can see if you follow the underlining and striking out. I've also provided what the definition was previously. So this committee in the 131st legislature convened a subcommittee during the interim between the first and second sessions to examine the medical use statute and to update and make other adjustments. That's certainly a large undertaking. And so the goals of that subcommittee, while grand, they didn't necessarily mean we saw a significant change. But one thing that subcommittee focused on were the definitions in the medical use statute. One of those core goals was to become more alphabetized, which is helpful for those of us who read the statutes a lot. But there was a lot of conversation around the definition of caregiver retail store at that subcommittee meeting. And so what is currently in statute represents the recommendations that were made by that subcommittee and approved by this committee last session. So you can kind of see where it started and finished. The previous version of the definition included, it had some issues because it did not include other items other than cannabis plants or harvested cannabis that were being sold by caregivers operating retail stores. The other concern about the caregiver retail store in its previous iteration, and I think has been flagged, particularly by municipalities in the current proposal as well, is that it makes it very difficult for municipalities to know if a retail store is operating in their jurisdiction. And municipalities do have the ability they have some authority over these operations within their municipalities. And so that is one of the areas of concern that was flagged. This is a version of this version, or a similar version, was considered by the subcommittee, but it's not the version that was ultimately recommended by the subcommittee and approved by the last iteration of this committee. So that is what I have for you regarding section 1. So then section 2 of the amendment is what is in section 5 of the bill. And everything between section 1 and 5 of the bill is no longer being proposed. Those are related to the inherently hazardous substance. So section 5, this is amending a head note, but this is the head note is now slightly different. So now it will read administration and enforcement, rulemaking, attestations, forms, which is slightly different. And that is because now the amendment proposes proposes in section 3 and 4 to include attestations for registration or renewal, and then availability of forms. And it is not moving forward with the provisions that were in section 6 of the bill. The section 4 of the bill, it refers to portable document file formats, which we all know is PDF. But the way that it's written, it says, it shall ensure that all forms are made available in their entirety to the applicant as a PDF file format, independent of software, hardware, or operating systems, which I think is the point of PDFs. But I was wondering, is this the only way that they should be made available, or should this be in addition to ways in which they're currently available?
So I'll tell you why I'll get to why this is here. This came up from registered caregivers and folks. If you go to the website, and I don't feel like doing it, of the Office of Cannabis Policy, every other registration form is available in a PDF except for those who are trying to register with the agency in the caregiver program. They now have to, and we heard this in another bill, have to fill out these forms that time out, but they can't move to the next field unless they answer certain questions. Some of the questions that they are being asked are to attest to certain behaviors that are not even prohibited under the law. And so they can't fill the form out without saying that they will not do certain things that they are not necessarily required, they don't have to say. So I want the agency to make sure that they are allowing for registrants in the medical program to fill out their forms like all the other registrants that are listed online, and all those other registrants can download PDF documents. Those forms are in their entirety and they can be filled out and emailed back to the department. The website says that the online sort of portal is supposed to be for quicker turnaround. And we have heard testimony from folks that it does not end up actually in quicker turnaround. It ends up in a bit of a circular thing they can't get off of. And so what I'm trying to ensure is that the department, the office, make these forms available for the registrants in the same way they do for the adult use participants. So it would be in addition to how they currently do it, but they must ensure that they at least are made available in this way. If you understand that very long way of saying what
That
I'm
you would
trying
like
to
it
do.
to be in addition to?
Yes.
I do. And then my second question, and truly question, in your opinion, do you think it would be more appropriate for this direction to come in the form of unallocated language directing them to do this activity, which is a one-time activity, rather than putting into statute that all these forms should be in PDF files?
That may be the best way to approach it so that we don't have to see this in statute, but if you're the analyst, if you think that that is the best way to do it, I'm not going to say no. I'm not married to this. That's why we're having a discussion. Representative Boyer.
I'm engaged to it. And I think what would seal the deal is if we added something about paper copies simply being available. I think caregiver should be able to go up to the OCP window and ask for all the forms needed to become a caregiver, and they hand it to them and then they fill it out and give them some money and then they're a caregiver.
So it sounds like we may want to consider unallocated language directing the office to do this.
Okay.
Would you want to check with the office to see if they think that that would be satisfactory to accomplish what you are directing them to do?
Ms. Pierce.
paper forms are available already and you're welcome to direct us to continue to make them available. I believe there are some technical reasons why the individual forms for individual identification cards, registry identification cards, and caregiver registry identification cards are currently in Word format. In all, okay. But yes, we can make that happen.
Excellent.
Great.
Mhm.
So
Thank you.
we'll change section 4 by getting rid of it and having a new section at the end that it's unallocated language directing the office to have all registration and renewal forms available on their website in a PDF format, and to have paper copies available at the office for anyone who's there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in their entirety is important because
Yeah.
people need
Oh,
to be
yes.
able to see the whole, what they need to be ready to fill out and not have to wait for a screen to come up. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I saw your hand up, Madam Chair. Okay.
I actually did have a question at some point.
Okay, we'll get there. And then you'd be making the other changes to the head note as necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Before I move on, were there additional questions before I move on to section 5 of the amendment?
I'm looking at section 7.
Okay, so
Okay.
let's just keep
All
going.
right, not there. So, section 5 of the amendment is section 8 of the bill. And if I don't reference it, it's not included in the amendment if you're going along. So section 5 of the amendment is section 8 of the bill. In section 8 of the bill, it was proposed to this paragraph to be repealed, and the amendment is instead amending paragraph E to say, and this is under caregiver authorized conduct. And this is all the things caregivers are authorized to do. It's a very long list. This paragraph may not be construed to require that every member of a legal business entity organized pursuant to paragraph Q must individually register as a caregiver to engage in the conduct authorized by this paragraph. And my technical note is I think that this might be more appropriate in paragraph Q rather than here.
The only reason why I put it here, Ms. Olson, was because this was the paragraph that was referred to by those who were saying that they have new guidance from the Office of the Attorney General that they needed to individually register as caregivers in order to be legal. And if I'm not correct, I see people saying there, but I do remember this from testimony. And that's why I put it here, because this was the paragraph that was being used for that requirement.
So I'm not sure necessarily that it is the paragraph's fault. And what I mean by that is that this entire subsection, the header, the way that you go into this, is that this entire section is specific to caregivers. I think every single paragraph is only applicable to a registered, to a registered caregiver, which is perhaps one of the reasons why it's interpreted that way, because it does say a registered caregiver can organize as a legal business entity. But it's the caregiver that can do that. And there really is no other authorization in that subsection for anyone that's not a registered caregiver. So that is perhaps the underlying issue.
And you believe that could be solved by putting this statement in paragraph Q?
I do not know if it will solve it. I just think it's more appropriate that when you're talking about that the caregiver can be a legal business entity, that you might be able to say that every member of the legal business entity has to be a registered caregiver. I am not confident that you could then say that if they're not a registered caregiver, even though they might be a member of the legal business entity, that they're authorized to do anything else under that section. It's only applicable to a caregiver. So without the caregiver registration, you're not authorized to do any of that conduct. I think
Okay.
you would, by adding it and saying, the legal business entity could have other members who aren't caregivers, but they can't do any of the other authorized activity. So you may not be solving the problem
I guess,
in the way that it's presented.
okay. Here's the problem that we're trying to solve. The need to form a shadow business entity in order to conduct authorized conduct, to me, sets the caregiver up for some serious problems with the authorities should someone come looking and say, why do you have a shadow business entity that's not conducting any business? And so for the Office of Cannabis Policy to require that because of the way this is something new, by the way. This was not ever enforced until just recently. And the provision, this paragraph has been here, as you can see, since 2017. And it was only amended in 2021 because we changed marijuana to cannabis. So since 2017, this was here, but it wasn't ever enforced in the way that it now is. And so I'm trying to solve that problem. Maybe it cannot be solved, but it's an issue that I thought was odd that it was being enforced for the first time at the middle of last year.
Can I ask a question?
You may.
Are you referring to the current language in paragraph E?
The current language in paragraph E has been
Just the
here since.
reasonable monetary compensation.
And the reason why that's there is because there was a time when we weren't saying you were actually engaged in a transaction that was selling or buying. It was just compensation for the services, as you can see, of cultivating cannabis plants and assisting them. So this is very old language from a time when we weren't actually admitting in statute that sales were occurring. So it was kind of moribund, for lack of a better term. And then it was used recently to say every member has to be registered individually as a caregiver. Otherwise, they can't actually receive monetary compensation. Maybe that can't be solved.
Well, I mean, I think that's what the statute says. You have to be a registered caregiver.
Okay, so maybe we can't
So
solve this way.
I don't think that the language would solve
Okay.
the problem you're saying, and that's because if you go to the top of subsection 2, it's only specific to caregivers.
Yeah.
You must be a
Okay.
registered caregiver to do this authorized
Sure.
activity.
Representative Boyer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is the issue that we're trying to correct is we heard from folks that, for example, a husband and wife, and they wanted to be a partnership, and OCP said they couldn't be a partnership, but Part Q says that be organized as any type of legal business entity recognized under the laws of the state, including but not limited to LLC, partnership, or limited liability partnership. So do we need another unallocated language or something to direct? I'm just, what they're doing should be allowed already, it seems like. So it's hard to pass a law should we underline it?
No, I don't, what are you proposing? What are you saying? I don't understand your point. Sorry.
It's okay.
So this may not solve a problem. Maybe the problem cannot be solved. If you can, as a caregiver, organize as a legal business entity, which means there can be 3 members of an LLC or 2 members of a partnership. You are suggesting, Ms. Olson, that it's perfectly fine for the office to interpret that to mean that every member must be registered also as an individually registered as a caregiver in order to do authorized conduct under this part of law.
That's how I've interpreted the statute because of the way that the lead in is there. It says,
Okay,
yeah,
I don't want to belabor the point. I was
Yeah,
trying to
I
solve
mean,
a problem that seems like a problem, and
I'm not
maybe it's
saying
just
that
something
they're-
people have to deal with.
yeah, this committee can consider potentially other approaches. And I'm kind of, I feel like I'm hearing two things, and it's not that maybe they are more related and maybe they're less related than it might seem. We're sort of hearing like, well, I think maybe we are talking about just a business entity that has more people. There may be more than one way to tackle it. So if you want them to have a legal business entity with individuals who are not caregivers, you might say they can be a part of it and sort of, but that they can't do some of their specific authorized activity that they can and can't do.
Mhm.
You could say maybe they don't need to be caregivers, maybe they can be assistants. That's like an idea that I'm throwing out there that you could consider. I don't have a plan for how that could be drafted yet. But and unfortunately, I feel like I have yet to fully understand the problem to be able to offer some
Yeah.
solutions. And I know we did reach out to Maine Revenue Service around this, and they sort of answered, but it wasn't an answer I completely understood. Having something to do with how potentially things have changed for Maine revenue that have resulted in changes, not necessarily change to statute or how it's interpreted. So lots of things, probably, sorry to say more questions than answers. But as drafted, I'm not sure the language accomplishes your goal.
Okay, let's come back to it.
Okay.
This provision, again, doesn't need to be here if it's not gonna solve the problem that I believe is a problem, but maybe it just has to be a problem because you've got to register individually as a caregiver if you're in a partnership or in an LLC in order to do the authorized conduct. So let's move on. We'll come back. I'll ask questions of you when let's just get through this amendment. It's not that long.
Okay.
So, Ms. Olson.
Yes, you're right. It's not that long. Little thanks to you, I guess. Section 6 of the amendment is from section 10 of the bill. This is proposing to be amended slightly, just slightly.
Yeah, I just moved transport further in.
Yeah, move transport further in. It's adding the sell, offer to sell, and furnish to this provision. We're still talking about authorized conduct. for
Authorized
caregivers.
conduct, yeah.
But I did flag, it says on the property or premises owned, leased, or rented by the caregiver. Leased or rented threw up some flags for me.
Mhm.
If you are operating, if you have a lease or rental agreement, those may prohibit business conduct specifically. Some rental and lease agreements have those provisions, and they may have other related provisions that would be restrictive. So I don't know if it's, if you need to add language that's like leased or rented, if allowed or something, or if you need to take leased or rented out and maybe say, I think you need to account for that it's not a direct,
Right,
that you
because-
could just do it anywhere, no matter what. I think if your lease or rental agreement prohibits commercial activity at that place of where you live, then you don't automatically get to do it just because the statute says you can.
Okay, fair enough.
And this has a little bit more clarifying language. If you turn onto the back, where it says festivals or other industry related events, Senator Hickman's has added regarding cannabis for medical use to make it clear when we talk about industry related, it's medical use cannabis specifically, and not just, and does not necessarily include things that are specific to adult use. And it replaces it uses the word registrant to refer to those people at the very end of the sentence.
Yes,
Yeah, so.
so I'm certainly fine with striking leased or rented, so not to get
Mr. Chair.
into the movement. Chair recognized Representative Boyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be a little more comfortable with just the qualifying language or leaving it as is, because there's plenty of people that rent, caregivers that rent, so we wouldn't want them to, if their lease allows for it, we wouldn't want to preclude them. So either adding the qualifying language, or I feel like a lease would trump state law. It's an agreement. right?
I would not want to put into statute something that might confuse.
Okay, then,
people,
then
but
as allowed
qualifying
by,
Language could
Okay.
be appropriate.
Yes,
here.
qualifying language should be used
Let's
in
do the-
order to make it clear what we mean.
and then I have a question. I see that we, through delivery or private arrangement. With the language suggested here, would that allow for folks to meet in public?
I would say, could be interpreted that way. If there, I don't know if there are other statutes that would place any additional restrictions on that. I don't think the way that it's written here as a standalone says that it has to be in a private location or non-public location or prohibits public location. But I don't know if there's something else in statute that might, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, you know, since the beginning of the program, patients didn't want random cannabis growers showing up at their house and vice versa, especially with security issues and whatnot. So it was always kind of discreet in that way. And I'd like, you know, we're dealing with this to make it clear. So I think that would be important too. And that's, again, I think conduct that's always historical.
We need to get to a solution to whatever it is you want, sir.
Sure.
So are you saying that it should say what in order to get to what you want it to mean?
That nothing would preclude transactions to occur in public settings, in public places.
I mean, I can draft language to say that, but I think I would want to hear from OCP if there are anything else that we need to be aware of that's in current
Sure.
statute that may impact that.
Ms. Pierce?
And unfortunately, at 9:30 at night, I cannot give you a full legal analysis of that, the effect of this. What I can tell you is that one provision that springs to mind is the municipally authorized drug-free safe zones.
Correct.
That where you certainly could not engage in this activity under Title 30A. So I will not be commenting further on that though, because it's too late for me to do it justice.
And I think that it would be very clear to say that nothing in this paragraph would allow for that to happen. So we can make sure that nobody believes that it's okay to meet in a drug-free zone to engage in authorized conduct.
I mean, I think you also have to consider private property. I'm not saying, I don't know, I guess I'm not saying we have to necessarily account for it in statute, but I would not want to create a situation that would seem to imply that it could take place anywhere, because there are other laws to account for outside of those in our, so we may need to put some qualifying language in there to just make it clear that it can't violate any other
Yes.
laws
Yeah.
on property, which I'll figure out a best way to say that.
Awesome.
Okay. Section 7.
Hold on, let me write my note.
So nothing in this paragraph may be construed to allow for authorized conduct in violation of any other law or private property rights, or we can't violate other people's rights in order to have this activity happen. We want to make sure that that language is clear. Representative Frederick.
Just something to consider, federal property also.
Okay. Section 7. Section 7 of the amendment is the same as section 24 of the bill.
Yeah,
And I have some questions. Just want to make sure we get through it. And it has been amended.
I don't think that I amended this. At least, well, I changed department to office.
Yeah,
But
that
I
might
don't
be
think
it.
that I amended
Yeah, you're-
the content.
Yes, you are correct. I don't know what my own note is over there. So, oh, I think I talked about it. Sorry, it is late. The provisions in the bill, it's on the blue analysis sheet. I actually wrote this one out because it is the same as in the bill.
Okay,
So the provisions in this bill that restrict the office from posting on its publicly accessible website or otherwise making publicly available, except upon request, applications, supporting information and other non-confidential information regarding a registered caregiver, including your address, where they cultivate, manufacture, test, package, store, or sell cannabis plants or harvested cannabis. These were considered on the recommendation of the Right to Know Advisory Committee by the Judiciary Committee last session before being enacted. These materials would, as written, these materials would still be considered public
mhm.
and would be provided upon request to anyone who requests them. The proposal does not specify if those who can request them are limited in any way, and it also doesn't provide any additional provisions about what the person who has requested the materials may then subsequently do with them.
Well, right now, they're just out there for the world to see, which means anyone can access them. When the Judiciary Committee made this recommendation, and we have spoken to a few members of that committee since, they never saw this non-confidential information becoming publicly accessible. Because the issue was municipalities might request, a person who was buying a property might request it, and people call Ms. Olson when we were in the middle of our subcommittee, we knew that we needed to address this purely confidential information because it wasn't really workable in the world. And we hadn't gotten into a solution, but since the Judiciary Committee has jurisdiction over confidential information and statute, they believed that when they were going to make this information public, that there was never any intention for it to just be available on the publicly accessible website. So it was almost requested by those who need to know, municipal officials, people who might be buying property that may have a grow in it, to determine if they're buying property that is run by somebody who was legally registered to do it. And at the time, the office would say, we can't tell you whether or not they have a registration that's active and in good standing or not. And so we understood we needed to make this information non-confidential, but even the Judiciary Committee members who voted to pass this thought that this would just show up on the website. And the destruction to people's lives that has happened since is something that we are trying to deal with here, because while non-confidential information becomes public, it doesn't mean it needs to be publicly accessible. So we are trying to make it clear to the Office of Cannabis Policy that they have the authority to provide information to those who request it on a need-to-know basis, but that it being available on a publicly accessible website is way too far. So I don't know how to write that, but that is what this is intending to do. Ms. Olson.
Michelle, could you? I did provide the section of statute that this provision is in. There's something
Representative
else on
Boyd.
top, but
I have the spreadsheet up on my phone, so I can tell you currently what is posted. And maybe that can help. The registrant name, the registrant's DBA, the registrant's number, the registration number, the issue date, the expiration date, whether it's active or not, the status, the residential town, the residential county, the cultivation town, the cultivation county, the retail town, the retail county. So I guess there's no specific street addresses, so I wouldn't want to go further than what we authorized already. And it seems that we haven't authorized street addresses, but we do know their name, their business name, their registration number. where they live, where their business is. So I really don't want to go any further than that.
Well, the Ms. Olson's question was, do we need to specify who gets to request it? My quick answer is no. We don't need to specify who can request the information. It's public information. And so if someone asks for it, press, the office is able to share it with them because as it is right now, it's publicly accessible on their website. So I'm not interested in restricting who can request the information. That horse is left. I'm trying to contain damage. This is damage control. And it was certainly not the intent of anybody in the legislature that this would happen this way.
Having served on the Right to Know Committee as staff,
Mhm.
I do understand that one of the things that the committee considers is about how to make publicly accessible data more easily accessible by the public and to reduce the administrative burden and costs on state government for which they have the jurisdiction over in terms of these FOA requests. And that one of the things that agencies and municipalities and anyone subject to FOA works towards as an achievable goal under the FOA rules is to reduce the burdens on an individual making a freedom of access request. If the data can be posted online because it is publicly available, agencies are doing that in order to make it easier for people who want access to that data to get it. It's publicly available. So by putting it at request, you are placing a higher burden on the agency and potentially on the individual requesting that data because there are potentially costs associated with getting those records. And so for agencies that get common requests, like get asked the same thing over and over again, it is more and more as they have the technological capability, they usually for that data post it online in an easily accessible place so that when they get that request for the 12th time that year, they're not devoting staff resources, which potentially come with a cost for the requester, to re-accessing that data, packaging it, and sending it back out. So they're creating these publicly accessible, whatever it is, database or just materials on their website. I think that that's probably, and although I wasn't a part of this, the intent behind the change. My understanding is that this chapter, this title, was up for review under the annual Right to Know.
Yeah.
Or it's not annual.
Yeah.
They don't all get reviewed every year. There's a schedule for review by agency, and the Right to Know Advisory Committee, along with its staff, carefully review all confidentiality provisions and all other data that appears in statute to determine what is still appropriate, what changes might be needed to be made, and how to make access to public records easier with lower barriers for the public, because these records are public. And then if you think that they should be confidential, right, we also have a process for establishing records as confidential that meet certain criteria, and we also have the review process as well. I think that, so that's.
So having served as an analyst for that, what I'm hearing you say is that this horse has left the barn. There's really nothing we could do about it unless we make a request to make all this information confidential again, and we go back in front of the Judiciary Committee and say, this is why this needs to be confidential. Would that be fair to say?
That would, if you were to propose to make information that is currently public confidential, that would require review before the Judiciary Committee, yes.
Sure.
And as drafted, that's not what's happening. It's still public, but as drafted, it
Contradicts the purpose.
it contradicts the purpose of FOA and reducing the barriers
Yep.
for members of the public to get public records from a government agency.
Got it. Section 8, please.
Section 8, this is new. It's not what I mean by that is it's not in the bill. It is in 2425A subsection 15. So this would be a new subsection. I've given you 2425A in your packet. 14 is the one we were just talking about. That's the last subsection. And so this would be a new subsection 15 about additional application information. It notwithstands subsections 3, 4, 5, and 6, which again are in your packet so that you can see them. 3 is the application for registry identification card qualifications. 4 is the criminal history record check for caregivers administering on school grounds. 4 is issuance or denial of registry identification cards. 5 are requirements for the issuance of registry identification cards. And 6 are the application for registration certificate qualifications. So notwithstanding those subsections, an applicant for the registration card or certificate shall submit to the office, and the office shall consider in determining whether to issue those the following information. And if the applicant is a legal business entity, then they must submit this information for every officer or director of the legal business entity. And the applicant shall submit if the applicant has held a license, permit, certificate, or other government issued authorization in another jurisdiction, that is a defined term, within the previous 5 years, allowing cultivation, manufacture, testing, or sale of cannabis plants or harvested cannabis or cannabis products as defined in Title 28B. I might make the section reference as well, but the applicant shall submit information regarding any violations by or penalties imposed on the applicant in these other jurisdictions or in the other jurisdiction.
And the intent of this section, I don't know if I wrote it right or not, is to just give the office one tool to consider if they want to deny a registration based upon the information provided by the applicant in this subsection of law. That's the intent, whether this gives them that or not, or it's written in a way that does, I don't know. But right now they shall issue. And this says, just notwithstanding that they shall issue, if they get information from the applicant that they've got some violations somewhere else, then they have a right to not issue. That's the intent. Just like an additional consideration in the adult use statute.
I'm thinking. I don't know if this as drafted would allow the office to use this information to deny an identification card or certificate.
Okay.
Not because of the way it's drafted here, but because there's no corresponding language where you would issue, I mean, right now it says that the department shall register and issue, I'm looking at the card, identification card on 3, to an applicant who submits a complete application that meets the requirements of this subsection.
Mhm.
And those really include submitting to the criminal history record check.
The fee.
And the fee. And the disqualifying drug offense. And the information if you're a qualifying patient. So if the intent is to require that all of the anyone who would be issued a registration identification or a card or registration certificate to have to submit this information and for the office to use it in some way to make a decision on the certificate or
Mhm.
card. That language may need to be brought into those subsections rather than
Having it be
having it
here.
as a standalone. I'm not saying I wouldn't also have a standalone and just reference it, but because this is always a tricky chapter to amend. But that is I'm sorry, I'm thinking on the fly because I don't think I understood the
make
intent
recommendations.
okay. I'm sorry, I didn't understand the intent of that when I read it this morning. And so I'm only just thinking about that now, once you've explained why it's here. And how that might need to fit. And Gabby says she has a suggestion on how we might be able to do that.
So you can leave section 8 the way it's drafted.
Okay,
I
You
like that.
can, yeah, you can amend 2425A for B and just add a cross-reference to sub 15.
25, 8,
I have
4,
to do that in the
B.
certificate part too.
I'm sorry.
This is related to, yeah, you would. So 2425A
A.
for B, the department may deny an application for a card or for renewal of a card only if, and then you would just add a reference if you wanted that to be a reason for denial, then you would add a reference to new sub section 15. And you would want to do the same thing in sub 7. Because that's registration certificates, same
Yep.
idea.
I forgot there's the requirement and then there's the language about issuance in a different style.
Yeah,
Okay, so we'd be referencing 7A, B. Got it. And then is there a third one? Just those two?
I think it's just those two.
Okay, great.
Oh, there's,
I
well,
think there's
hold on.
something else.
there's
Manufacturing is a
yes,
different
there's
spot?
manufacturing facilities, and I believe our testing facilities also
Testing,
separately
They
addressed.
are.
So 2423A is where testing facilities are, I believe, and then 2423F is where manufacturing facilities.
Yeah, I just
are.
didn't see the same language in those two sections.
They
They
are
don't,
slightly different.
they're not written the same way.
Mhm.
And so we would have to create something that's not there in order to make that clear.
Well, I think that is probably something I can do as long as I understand
Yep,
the intent.
you do understand. it.
And as long, I'm assuming, Gabby, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's at least some language that provides for what you have to do and not do. I lost my confidence at the end of that.
You and me both, it's okay.
So while she's looking into this, would the intent be that if the applicant has a violation or penalty imposed on them from another jurisdiction, that they not be issued? Or,
It's not that, I don't want it to just be this requirement that they not be issued, but that is a factor that
Okay.
the office could use to deny the registration. So it's not an automatic denial. It is, because it say right now it says, where is it? You just said 4B. Let me just see how it reads now.
yeah, and 7.
The office shall verify, and shall approve or deny in accordance with such that within 5 years shall issue a department may deny an application only if. So they may deny an application only if this happens, this happens, this happens. And then if you reference that other thing, then I guess that could be a reason why they would deny the registration. Are you saying that it would be automatic? if they provided that information.
I mean, as sort of as drafted now in the current statute, not your language, but these are sort of hard denials. They deny only for these things, but if these things exist, then you would deny. So, I mean, we could maybe add a different section that says that the office could consider this and may use it as a reason for denying, but that leaves a little bit open-ended to it. It might be that you could say, like if the violation or penalty imposed in the other jurisdiction is substantially similar to a violation or
May I ask
something that
Ms.
would have resulted in a license
Yeah.
being
Well, I know
revoked
that
or denied
Alyssa
here.
Ellis isn't with us tonight, but I was wondering how the office uses those additional considerations in the adult use statute.
I believe they are too vague to be enforced right now.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's what Miss Ellis might have said too. I can't remember now, but I think, what section are those?
In the adult use statutes,
Yeah.
they're just under additional considerations, right? It's toward the beginning of the
Yeah.
chapter.
Oh, yeah, 203.
Yeah.
Tax compliance, yeah, so the only thing that is, okay, and then other violations or penalty. Oh, no, this would be, so this is license violations, and that's the same thing that would be added here. Yeah, so that would be, I think, disqualifying if you had. Yeah, I can't tell you. Sorry, I thought we were talking about crimes, other non-cannabis related crimes,
No.
but no, we're looking at violations. So I think. Yeah, no, I think we'd have to ask Miss Ellis, and she is long gone by 10 o'clock at night.
I don't want to put anything in statute that's vague, and so let's move on from section 8. Section 9 is pretty self-explanatory. Section 11 would be removed from this because we can't do anything about section 7. Section 10, I believe, is absolutely necessary to keep in this bill, which just directs the Office of Cannabis Policy to provisionally adopt rules for the research program that have been in statute since 2019. So as I look at, and I love doing work sessions, so as I look at this, the only part of this pared down amendment that I think provides some caregiver retail store, let's just talk about that. Ms. Pierce, can you please come forward? So when we amended the definition for caregiver retail store in our negotiation, and maybe my memory is wrong, but I did not believe that we were using the new definition to apply to these home offices that are not caregiver retail stores. And so when I saw that guidance, my head exploded a bit. And between August, whatever it was, when this went into effect, September 9th, and now, there are a lot of folks who lost those stores because of the guidance that said that that's what this definition meant. And so the reason why I'm doing this is because the horse may have already left the barn on this as well, but I do not see a home office as a caregiver retail store, and that's what I'm trying to clarify here.
And I would say respectfully, we discussed it at the subcommittee meetings the summer before it was introduced. I again discussed the ramifications of the definitional change. I think your analysts also advised on that. And so we absolutely were very clear-eyed and explained to the committee several times the impact of changing this definition. And we understand that municipalities want to know what kind of retail activities are happening within their borders. And so some municipalities have chosen not to authorize those kinds of retail activities. And I think that is where some folks who are operating retail stores have not been able to continue because they have not been able to obtain local authorization to operate those stores.
So Ms. Olson, do you remember it that way? I thought we were changing the definition to make sure that we were authorizing the sale of things that were not already covered in the definition and not to include a home-based office that wasn't open to the general public.
I think that is the sticking point potentially, because what you just said, if it's not open to the general public, it wouldn't meet the definition in statute, but if it is, oh, if the store sells any of the variety of products allowed to qualifying patients and is open to the general public at a fixed location, then it meets the definition of caregiver retail store. And I do remember the concerns brought forward by municipalities around this.
I remember the concerns brought forth by municipalities, but it was my understanding that a home-based office that was not available to the general public would not be considered a caregiver retail store. And when we changed the definition, we weren't intending to include those things that were not open to the general public. So that's why I'm trying to clarify that now we can't call that a caregiver retail store if it's not open to the general public. So that's the reason for this proposed amendment to the amendment of caregiver retail store.
I mean, the current language for caregiver retail stores says a store authorized in accordance with the chapter used by a registered caregiver to sell these things to qualifying patients and other items to the general public at a fixed location. So I guess if you sell cannabis, paraphernalia, plants, harvested cannabis, related supplies, or educational materials to qualifying patients at a fixed location, that meets the definition of caregiver retail store.
And that was, but
And then the other items would be, because you can only sell those items to qualifying patients, the other items part, you would only sell it to the general public.
right. I guess we're crossing wires here.
Yes.
The fixed location language was already in the definition of caregiver retail store. And it was not being enforced that a caregiver retail store was a home-based office that did these things, but was not open to the general public. So changing the definition wasn't about the fixed location. It was about making sure that the authorized activity within those stores could include selling things that were not cannabis to folks in the general public who are not qualifying patients. And that's how we changed the definition. I did not know by changing that definition, it would be interpreted in the guidance to now include a home-based office that was not generally accessible to the public, even though it may have provided some of the very same things to the patients.
I'm happy to provide you with transcripts from when we discussed this.
I've seen them. Sometimes even when you are on the same page, I did not understand, and others did not understand that it would apply all of a sudden to these things that had not been considered caregiver retail stores just because we changed the definition in the way that we did. My question is, that's water under the bridge. Does this trouble you beyond seeing as though it is a bad faith negotiation, which I just don't want to talk about that. I just want to say, does this new definition of caregiver retail store trouble the water in any way? And it's a question for either or both of you.
Still not sure what an office is here, because that was part of what we were trying to clarify, was what was an office and what was a store. And we came up with the definition of caregiver retail store to distinguish, the definition that is in statute was meant to distinguish those offices from caregiver retail stores, and was crafted in such a way that it was supposed to account for those. So I do have concerns about adding back an undefined term that we were attempting to
What is an undefined term?
office. Because that is the crux of the issue. Municipalities have concerns about things that appear to be retail stores that are open by appointment only, but the appointment is you drive into the driveway and you call and you say, may I come in? And so that was part of what was being addressed by the definition. And I believe municipalities just want the ability to regulate these retail activities within their back borders. I don't want to speak for them, though.
No, they made it very clear in their testimony how they feel about it. I don't want a home-based office to be a caregiver retail store.
There should probably be something in here about a domicile or a residence then.
Okay. Can you offer in this moment, a caregiver resource does not mean an office at a
I really,
residential location. I mean, or a place where the person lives. I just don't want those to be caught up in caregiver retail store. And I'm trying to carve them out. That's what the intent is here.
I think, yes, we could say it does not include. And I might not use the word office. I might say something like area or space or something along those lines, but it just does not include an area within the caregiver's residence where the caregiver does these things, but I think you probably need to add for the sale piece. Right now, it doesn't include the, as currently written now, it just says that they offer these things, but not that they offer it necessarily for remuneration.
Okay.
But I guess that would be one way to do it, to tie it to that it's the caregiver's residence, that not generally accessible to the public.
Okay. That's what I want. That's the intent for this section. To make it clear that that is not something that needs municipal approval. So if we can clarify that with some language that works, that would be the intent of section 1. And I see that Ms. Pierce is looking up something.
I'm trying to find the language around inspecting home-based
Yep.
caregiver and how we are not allowed to enter those portions of it, yeah. Just looking for the language we use to describe that.
So while Ms. Pierce is looking for that, I just want the committee to be aware that I would like for section 1 to be a part of a proposal with clarifying language that we're trying to get right now. Section 2 and 3. Section 4 becomes unallocated. Section 5 goes away. Section 6 with qualifying language. Section 7 and 8 go away because they don't seem to solve the problem that I'm trying to get them to solve. Which one?
7.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Representative Boyer may want to say something about section 7, and then section 9 is pretty straightforward, and section 10. And then section 7 and 11 are connected to each other, and they can go away because the horse has left the barn, and Ms. Olson has made it very clear why it is so that these things happen. But Representative Boyer, what is your comment about section 7?
Thank you, Mr.
which would
Chair.
also be a part of
Yep,
section
thank you, Mr. Chair. What I heard Ms. Olson say, and I could be wrong, is she raised some factors that the Right to Know Advisory Commission uses to evaluate policy. I didn't hear her say that it wouldn't be allowed to do it. It goes against some best practices that if they could just put a spreadsheet on the website, they should, because it saves a couple tax dollars. But I mean, this department has a robust staff. And I think also the other thing about weighing the public right to know is the harm or harms that could be caused from the public right to know on these caregivers that we heard got debanked because of this list. So I don't think it's unreasonable. We're not asking to make this confidential, simply that the office has to shoot an email with the most up-to-date spreadsheet that they're already doing right now. I don't, it could be challenged or whatever, I don't know, but I think making it not public is a more compelling public interest than just having to put it on the website because it's easy.
Chair recognizes Representative Chapman, followed by Representative Fredericks.
I don't know. Thank you, Chair. I don't know if I'm way out of whack, but where it's a caregiver, shouldn't the information be restricted? Maybe not completely secure and withheld, but restricted at a minimum, medical reasons.
If I may,
You may.
that confidentiality section is quite long. And there are some protections for information. It does say what is allowed and not allowed.
Ask Ms. Olson a question.
Let me go to Representative Fredericks first. She's in the queue. Representative Fredericks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, so on the same premise, maybe a question for you, Ms. Olson. So, there's a need to have information accessible to the public, but we need to protect the information, those people. Is there a way that we could provide information and redact the names, just leave the number, the license number, and then whomever is seeking that further information, contact the department and just identify it, but some way to redact or protect. It's a cash industry, so all those names that are up there, any knucklehead can, target and go ahead and vandalize. There are many reasons. The debanking is huge for people. So I'm just looking for a solution.
Any proposal to do that is making information confidential. That requires review by the Judiciary Committee, and generally there's a series of criteria to consider weighing public interest with the information you're trying to protect. That would be a much more detailed conversation about what is currently considered confidential and what is not. This provision is really, it is specific to information that's already been deemed public. So nothing about this proposal changes the public availability of that information. It only makes it more difficult for people, taxpayers,
Oh, thank you, Ms. Olson.
to access this information. Remember, the Freedom of Access Act is to get information from government entities into the hands of people. So my point there was certainly it creates administrative burdens. That's true of any agency that receives FOA requests at any level of government. But it is also the people who want that information. And then, anyone who gets that information could then do anything they want with it. You could post it on social media. You could put it on your own website. You could email it to everyone on your family Christmas card list. Like, you
Mr.
do whatever
Chair.
you want with it.
Representative Boyd.
I understand that, and that's where we're at today, right? Because this thing is online and floating around, and so as Senator Hickman stated, this is kind of damage control. This is triaging, and so my question to you: is it legal to do what Section 7 is doing?
I mean, one, I don't give legal advice.
That is correct.
It's not making information, it's not changing the accessibility of these public records. It's not changing anything about what is confidential and what is public. It, I think, goes against the spirit of the FOA law,
Yes.
but, and increases administrative burden and access to public records by people, but
I hear you loud and clear, and I have my own gripes about FOA and getting, information through that. So given that it's something we can do and we're not making it confidential, I don't, does any of your colleagues care that much that they want this public? Is it getting in the way of a report?
Representative Topeka.
Are you saying to keep section 7?
Yeah.
I can't vote for this if section 7's in it. I do agree that it would have to go before judiciary. I imagine it'd go before judiciary again. I understand how it's described to me makes a lot of sense in the fact that, like, asking a department, requesting a department, part of what makes it publicly accessible is if it's something that you're asked for multiple times, like having it accessible on the website. So, like, I'm not doing a good job explaining it, but
I painfully am with
Yeah.
you, Representative Speaker.
Yeah.
The horse is out of the barn, the toothpaste is out of the tube, whatever you want to call it. Publicly accessible information is publicly accessible. And again, this committee didn't do this.
No.
Another one did under the purview that they have and the jurisdiction that they have. And this is the way it is, y'all. And I don't want to hold up the other provisions of this bill with something that really does contradict the spirit of the law, and it's just a problem. So it is something that I just think 7 and 11 need to come out. And I would like the section 1 with clarity. Ms. Olson, have you come up with anything you can share with us about what to do to make sure that those home-based areas are not considered caregiver retail stores for the purposes of municipal regulation?
I'm,
And if we can't do it tonight, we can strike section 1 from the bill as well, because again, the damage was done with the folks who already shut their stuff down because the definition changed the way that it did. We can come back to this in another bill, another time, if we really need to do it. If we can't get a good language tonight, and we still have 2 more bills to do, I'm not trying to hold this up. So with that being said, Ms. Olson,
I mean, I am concerned that we make a change tonight and it creates additional confusion.
exactly.
That's, and so with that being said, Gabby did there, we use the word dwelling unit in another place, but I just, I know how, and I've heard from everybody here, how the changes that have been made to this have had an impact on people. And I, as your analyst, would not want to offer language that I'm not confident, meaning that it's been vetted by not just me in my office, but the people who this would impact in what is offered.
Yep.
If that's what the committee would like me to do, I can draft that language, but I just, I understand how important this is
It is.
to the committee, and it could use more eyes, especially from caregivers who operate these types of retail stores, and potentially also understanding, hearing maybe from municipalities and looking more closely at what's in statute so that this is tailored in a way that actually achieves the
But
goal,
it's
and
a-
we're not changing it and then having to change it again and change it again.
That is offering this up to another conversation in another day.
And
Representative Speaker.
I just want to say I appreciate you because I know that I've had people reach out to me about this very thing. And so I know that that's hard. And so I appreciate you offering it up because, yeah, and it is something that I am willing to continue to work on. Because I understand the intent of a home-based business as opposed to, a rented retail space or a rented space that somebody is operating out of. So.
All right. So if I can say section 2 and section 3 in section 6 with the qualifying language and not violating any other laws and other properties that are federal or state, or making sure that we get that qualifying language right. And then section 8, I'm sorry, section 9 and section 10. And that's it.
This section 8.
Section 9, section 8 is not in it any longer because it's not going to serve a purpose. And it's the way the bill, the length, the strap, we have to come back to that another day.
Okay.
All I'm trying to do with section 8 was give the department some discretion. We have to be a little bit more clear about what we need to say, what's a requirement, and then what is a denial. And we just can't do that in this moment.
And we've carried over bills that are sort of related to this.
Yep. Yep, we absolutely have.
Topic,
Representative Frederick has one of those. And so I'm looking at a proposal that would move forward section 2, section 3, section 6, section 9, and section 10.
2, 3, 6.
9 and 10. And there's some qualifying language that's needed for section 6. There's some unallocated language that's going to direct the agency around forms that we talked about, that I forgot about the unallocated section.
There'll be a new unallocated section at the end, directing the office to have all of the registration and renewal forms in their entirety as a PDF on their web and available as on paper at their office.
Chair recognizes Representative Mallon.
Thanks, Chair. Just to be clear, the qualifying language in section 6, is that the drug-free school zone language you were discussing earlier?
And making sure federal properties and, private property rights are respected. We just have to carve out those places where this authorized conduct cannot happen.
And to clarify that if it's a leased or rental premise that it has to be within the guidelines of those
Leases,
leases. and
those
rental
agreements,
documents, yeah.
those agreements, yes.
State property's fine.
So
It's the people's house.
what is the will of the committee? Chair recognizes Representative Fredericks.
Yeah, I make a motion to pass LD 1840 as amended.
It's been moved by Representative Fredericks. It's been seconded by Representative Chapman. The amendment has been read into the record a couple of times with clarity provided. Is there any discussion of the motion from the committee? Chair recognizes Representative Speaker.
Maybe it's not so much about the discussion, it's just a general gratitude to folks for being here this late and working through this, even though our brains are fried. So, my discussion in the motion is thank you. Thank you very much.
Committee ready for Representative Mallon?
Just to explain my reasoning, I'm like, not to surprise anyone, I will be voting against the motion. My primary remaining concern, this is much better than, to me, than it was in originally, is the festivals portion of it.
Is the who?
The festivals
Got it.
portion of it in section 6. I'm just not ready to go down that road yet. Even though the section is improved with the qualifying language that you said. So want to be transparent and explain my reasoning.
Committee's ready for the question. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Doosan absent. Senator Hickman.
Yay.
Senator Hickman votes yes. Senator Timberlake absent. Representative Graham absent. Representative Terry.
Yes.
Representative Terry votes yes. Representative Frost.
Yes.
Representative Frost votes yes. Representative Chapman.
Yep.
Representative Chapman votes yes. Representative Boyer.
Yeah.
Representative Boyer votes yes. Representative Supika.
Yes.
Representative Supika votes yes. Representative Himes absent. Representative Fredericks.
Yes.
Representative Fredericks votes yes. Representative Fairclough.
No.
Representative Fairclough votes no, and Representative Mallon.
No,
Representative Mallon votes no.
7 members in the affirmative, 2 in the negative. Oh, can I really count? And 4 members absent. The motion prevails. Absent members have until tomorrow to cast their vote. Is it all not to pass?
Yes.
All not to pass it is. Chair closes the work session on LD 1840. Thank you all very much. We're almost there. The chair will open the work session on LD